Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. I'm Stephanie and today's video is all about how to seem like you know about wine. Today I'm going to teach you some wine basics just so you have a general overall knowledge about wine. We're going to chat about tasting wine, how to go about that properly. We're going to talk about a few of the main varietals, whites and reds, and then what rosé is and what bubbly or champagne is. We're also going to go over some of the terminology that you might encounter, and then a little bit about glassware and decanting. By the end of this video, you should have a really good basic understanding of the ins and outs of wine and how to kind of carry a conversation and not embarrass yourself. I worked at a wine store for about 4 years, and while I was there was a lot of different education and training. We got to do lots of different tastings, lots of formal education, so I picked up a lot while I was there, and I also became really interested in wine while I was there. I'm gonna start with going over how to open a bottle of wine. So if you have a bottle with a cork in it, and you just have a 2-step waiter's corkscrew, super simple to use, you just want to cut a little circle around the foil right underneath the lip here. And then cut down into the foil vertically. And then you should be able to peel it off fairly simply. So the whole thing should just come off like that. And then make sure your cork is straight up and down and just start screwing down into it. Try to go straight down, otherwise you'll hit the glass. And make sure to turn the cork and not the bottle. I slightly turned the bottle. And then you just use that first little lip and bring it up halfway, as high as it'll go, and then use the second lip and pull it up the rest of the way. Nice and simple. The cork should be a little bit wet to touch, and it shouldn't have any crumbly bits. That's a sign that there's something wrong with the cork. So to start with the tasting process, obviously we're just gonna pour a bit of wine into a glass. So this glass has a slightly larger bowl, which is pretty normal for red wine glasses. So these kinds of glasses are for red wine. They're generally a little bit taller and just wider in the bowl and sometimes wider in the opening as well. Where a white wine glass like this one is a little bit narrower because the flavors in a white wine are a little bit more delicate. So you want to be precise about kind of where they're hitting. Where red wine can use a little bit more air circulation to kind of aerate. There's bigger, bolder flavors and they'll hit you in a bigger way. You don't need such a concentrated opening. So to start with, we just look at the wine. So you're looking for things like how intense is the wine color. So in this case, this is like a very deep hue. We're looking at the color itself. So in this case, I would call this like a deep violet. This is a Malbec, so we're expecting something a little bit darker and on the more like reddy purple side. And then you can look at the legs as well. It really just tells you about the viscosity and alcohol level. So a higher alcohol wine, you'd expect that the legs move a little bit slower, they're more viscous. And the legs are just these little bits that are kind of running down the glass. That part is not that important. So then you want to swirl the wine. So swirl it a good amount with your wrist. You don't want to go so heavy that it's like splashing everywhere. And then you want to smell it. So this part is very important. You want to get your nose like right in the glass. So swirling it oxygenates the wine. It gets a little more air in there and it kind of brings out the flavors more. And then get your nose right in there so that you can get all the aromas. And that part is important because part of tasting is about what you're smelling as well. So we know smell is so attached to our taste buds. And it also gives you so much information about the wine. So you can get flavors from the wine before you even taste it. You might already know what the wine is based on the smells that you're getting. There are a lot of wines that just have such a classic portfolio of flavors. Like the flavors are so textbook that you almost know already what it is just by the smell. So this particular wine is a Malbec from Mendoza, Argentina. So there are certain aromas that we would already expect to get off of it. So initially there's a fair amount of ripe red fruit. And you want to start a little bit general. Like what are the biggest flavors that are coming out? What are the most obvious fruit flavors? For red wine, it's broken up in red fruit, blue fruit, and black fruit. So like blackberries, blueberries, cassis berries, red cherries, dark cherries, those kinds of things. And then you can go a little more specific. So this one, there's a fair amount of blackberry coming off of the nose and a little bit of ripe red cherry. And then there's some kind of secondary characteristics. So like there's a little bit of earthiness in this, a little bit of spice. So it kind of smells a little bit like dirt or a little bit like a black pepper spice. And the more you practice this, the easier it becomes. So when you kind of already know what to look for, it becomes so much easier to get those flavors. And we'll chat in a minute about what to look for in different types of varietals, so different types of wines. Another quick little thing to make sure it looks like you know about wine, make sure you're holding it from the stem and not from the bowl of the glass, because you don't want to change the temperature of the wine, and it also leaves fingerprints on the glass. So after we've swirled it and we've smelled it, the next step is to taste it. So when you're first tasting it, it helps to kind of swish it around in your mouth so it coats all around your mouth, and then to suck in a little bit of air so you're kind of expanding the flavors in your mouth. So with red wine, some of the things that we're looking through are things like body. So how big is the wine? How full does it feel in your mouth? Does it feel on the watery side, or is it like a little more viscous, a little more thick in your mouth? Does it kind of coat things more? So this particular wine, Malbec, is generally a pretty full-bodied wine. This is definitely full-bodied. We're also looking at things like tannins. So tannins are that kind of like grippy feeling on like the roof of your mouth or the top of your tongue, or it even kind of sets on the outside of your teeth. It's also what makes your teeth turn red when you're drinking wine. It almost makes your mouth feel like it's been dried out slightly. So something that is very high in that feeling is a high tannin wine. And tannin comes from the red wine grape skins. We can also look at acidity. In this case, this wine isn't high in acidity, but there are some wines that are known to be quite high in acidity. So something like a New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc is generally quite high acidity, or a cold climate Pinot Noir is very high acidity. And acidity is that feeling like you've just like sucked a lime or a lemon, like it almost makes your mouth water. We also want to initially look at sweetness level. So is it a dry wine, is it off dry, or is it sweet? Most wines are dry, even if they taste fruit forward. So those are two different aspects of a wine. The sweetness level is about how much residual or added sugar there is on it, meaning like how much sugar was left in the wine, or was there sugar added to the wine. So this one is certainly a dry wine, as most of the wines that we buy are, but it is fruit forward. So there's a lot of fruit initially on the palate, which some people confuse for being sweet. So just remember to keep those separated. We have dry, off dry, which is a tiny bit sweet, and then sweet, which is like ice wine. And then a wine like this, which is dry, is considered fruit forward because on the palate initially there is a lot of fruit. Then let's pick out some of the flavors. So there's more of that lovely black cherry. It's a fair amount of dark fruit. It's a good idea to go for 3 main fruits to pick out and then 3 secondary or other characteristics. So the main fruits on this one that are kind of sticking out when I first drink it are blackberry, like a ripe red cherry, and some plum, like a dark plum. And then I'll look for some secondary characteristics. So just like on the nose, there's some more of that earthiness. So it almost tastes like soil. There's a little bit of that kind of peppery spice. And then it's slightly smoky in flavor as well. And then next we kind of want to look at, do I like the wine and does it taste balanced? So for yourself, that's what's going to be most important. Are those flavors kind of working with your palate? And then does it seem balanced? Or is it too sweet? Is it too acidic? Is it too tannic? So putting this aside for a moment, let's talk about some of the common grape varietals that we encounter a lot. So a grape varietal is the type of grape, like Pinot Gris, Chardonnay, Pinot Noir, Cabernet Sauvignon, a lot of the ones that you've probably encountered in your past. Let's break those down. We'll do whites first. So we'll start with Pinot Grigio. Pinot Grigio or Pinot Gris, it's the same grape, Grigio in Italy, Gris in France. So earlier we had talked about the red wine fruits being broken down into red, blue, and blackberries. And for white wines, we break it down into citrus fruits, stone fruits, and tropical fruits. So Pinot Grigio usually has some citrus fruits like lime and lemon, and generally has some stone fruit like apricot or nectarine, and then also commonly pear and apple. Pinot Gris and Pinot Grigio are commonly done dry, so you usually won't get a lot of sweetness on them. They're generally pretty light in body, so they're good for like a hot summer day when you really don't want that wine like lingering around in your mouth. It kind of goes down easily. And then often we get some like honey or floral or sometimes mineral-y characteristics as well. And then we have Chardonnay, which is very different than Pinot Grigio. So Chardonnay is generally also made in a dry style, but a lot more body to it. It's either a medium or full bodied wine. It can really range based on the style that it's made in. So if it's made in France in a certain region versus if it's made in a hot place in California, it really changes the flavor. So a lot of us know those very oaky, big, buttery Chardonnays from California that has a very different flavor than, say, a Chablis from France, which is really light and minerally. We can get a fair amount of tropical fruit on Chardonnay, like papaya or pineapple, and then also often apple or lemon. Or when it's aged in oak, it can taste a little bit like vanilla or like a buttery, creamy kind of feeling and flavor. Sauvignon Blanc tends to be quite fruit forward and have a good amount of acidity, and it's fairly easy drinking. Great patio sipper. On Sauvignon Blanc, we often get lime, green apple, passion fruit, and white peach. And then depending on where it's grown, like in a typical Marlborough New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc, you'll get a lot of those green flavors, something herbaceous, like green pepper or fresh cut green grass. And then Riesling tends to be very aromatic, so like you can really smell it. So we generally get a fair amount of stone fruit like nectarine or apricot, and then pear and apple flavors are really common as well. And they also tend to be very florally, so they can smell or taste a little bit like jasmine or some sort of blossomy flavor. Depending on how it's made, it can be dry or off dry. In a lot of regions in Germany, it's made in an off dry style, so a little bit sweet. And then we'll talk about some common reds. So the first one, Cabernet Sauvignon, you see everywhere. Cabernet Sauvignon is a great wine with food because it's so full-bodied and it has a fair amount of tannins, that gritty kind of feeling we were talking about before. It's not great to have on its own, but it does pair really nicely. So you wouldn't necessarily want to have a really light, smooth red with a big steak because it would feel like the steak is overpowering it. You want something that kind of matches food and wine levels together. So a big cab is great for a big steak. Cab tends to have a fair amount of dark fruit flavors, so like dark plum, tends to have cherry, blackberry, cassis berry, and then some oaky flavors as well, like spice, vanilla, black pepper, and then sometimes even licorice as well. And then Pinot Noir is fairly different from Cab, so it's much more on the lighter bodied side, light to medium bodied usually. It's a lot lower in tannins, but tends to have some acidity, especially in cooler climate areas. It's generally a lot more red fruit, like red cherry or strawberry, and then often has a lot of earthiness to it, like some people taste mushroom or that like soil earthiness. You can often also get flavors of chocolate or tobacco or spice or a little bit of oak, and also sometimes vanilla. Merlot is another common one, so this tends to be medium to full-bodied. We often get darker fruits like blackberry, dark cherry, or plum. And then it's pretty common to get flavors of cocoa or vanilla or oak or cedar if it's an oaked wine, and often has some herbaceousness as well. And then Syrah is another pretty well-known grape varietal. You sometimes hear it called Shiraz as well. So in Australia or like New World regions, you'll hear it pronounced Shiraz. And then in like the French style, the Old World style, it's called Syrah. It tends to be pretty bold and full-bodied, generally has a good amount of spice. Often we get lots of black fruit. It tends to be jammy, which is just like really fruity. And we often get notes of smoke as well. It can also be a pretty tannic wine, so it's generally nicer to have with food. So those are some of the top red and wine varietals. Let's chat really quickly about rosé. So just to make it really clear, rosé is not a different varietal. It's generally a red grape varietal like Merlot or Pinot Noir. And it's just that the grape skins are left on for a much less period of time, so it doesn't become so dark and bold. Okay, and then let's talk about sparkling wine or champagne. So champagne can only be called champagne if it's from that region in France. So it's very specific and it's generally fairly expensive. You're not really gonna find a champagne for under about $50, but that's okay because we have sparkling wine. So sparkling wine just means that it's carbonated. So it can taste like champagne or feel like champagne, it's just not from the Champagne region. So you can call it bubbly or sparkling wine if it doesn't come from that French region. We also have Prosecco, which again comes from a certain region in Italy. And those tend to be a lot more affordable, easily around the $20 mark. And then let's talk about decanting quickly. So you can decant any red wine. It basically just like opens up the flavor of the wine more, and a lot of wines can benefit from decanting. It's just often it's not necessary if it's like a new fruit forward style that's made to drink right away. You also don't have to have a decanter if you want to decant your wine. So it really just means you're like leaving it open for the air to touch it. So you could even decant your wine in the glass. So my wine has been sitting here decanting nicely for me for the last 10 minutes. And likely when I go back to drink the rest of it, it might feel a little more open. I might be able to taste and smell the flavors a little bit more. There are some wines that you should decant, some older wines or more like tannic, we call them tight wines. So if a wine feels tight, like it hasn't opened up its flavors yet, and the more you taste them, the more you'll be able to tell that, then those wines should be decanted in some way. Hopefully you found this video informative and interesting. If you did like it, please give it a like. And if you're liking my channel, then please subscribe. I'll see you in the next video. Cheers.